Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most traumatic, frankly mind-blowing, psychological and spiritual turning points in all of military history. We're heading back to the year 1098, straight into the chaotic, desperate heart of the First Crusade, to see exactly how a starving, trapped, and completely outnumbered army managed to pull off an impossible victory.
Okay, let's dive into this. How in the world did a rusty piece of iron, literally pulled from a muddy hole in the ground, save an entire army from the brink of total annihilation? Well, to understand the sheer power of this object, we really have to wrap our heads around the nightmare scenario the Crusaders found themselves in.
Section 1. Trapped and Starving. The Second Siege.
Imagine the situation. The Crusaders had literally just captured the great city of Antioch after a grueling 8-month siege. But before they can even catch their breath, they find themselves immediately surrounded by a massive Muslim relief army of 35,000 to 90,000 men, led by Kurbaga of Mosul. See, while the Crusaders had been busy breaking into Antioch, Kurbaga had been marching across the region gathering this massive coalition. When he arrived, he completely trapped the depleted, exhausted Crusader force inside the very city walls they had just conquered.
And the visceral horrors of this second siege? They set in almost immediately. Because the Crusaders had just spent months starving out the city, the food stores inside were practically non-existent. The accounts from the sources are just grim. Disease and absolute despair took hold. Men were reduced to eating seeds found in animal manure, boiling their leather belts, and hunting for rats just to survive. Desertions skyrocketed because, frankly, men had lost all hope.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how bad things got tactically. Out of an initial force that boasted several thousand powerful warhorses, the Crusaders were left with merely a few hundred serviceable mounts. Their heavy cavalry, which was the absolute core of medieval European military might, was effectively wiped out by starvation. Tactically, logically, and physically, they were finished.
Moving on to Section 2, Finding the Holy Lance, a desperate discovery.
Look at how incredibly fast this chaos unfolded. June 3rd, the city falls to the Crusaders. Just 3 days later, June 6th, Kerbogha's massive army arrives and traps them. And then, as the tension completely peaks, we hit the pivotal date of June 14th when a frantic, desperate excavation happens.
Right in the thick of this starvation and despair, a humble Provençal monk named Peter Bartholomew steps forward. He claimed he'd been experiencing visions of St. Andrew, who told him that the Holy Lance, the very spear that pierced the side of Christ on the cross, was buried right there in Antioch, under the floorboards of the Basilica of St. Peter. Now, despite heavy skepticism from some of the leaders, the desperation was so high that they actually authorized a secretive excavation. And deep in the dirt, Peter himself reached down and pulled out a piece of iron.
Which brings us to Section 3, the restoration of morale, a psychological pivot.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how this single moment triggered an immediate, miraculous psychological pivot among the starving soldiers. This marks the first of 3 main stages of the lance's impact. Raymond of Aguiers, a chaplain and an eyewitness chronicler, famously dropped to his knees and kissed the iron point the second it was exposed from the soil. You have to realize this wasn't just a historical artifact to them. It was perceived as a direct, tangible message of divine intervention right when they needed it most. An infectious surge of zeal just swept through the ranks like wildfire. Sure, some of the high-ranking leaders, like Bishop Adhemar of Lpuy, were highly suspicious that the relic was planted. But for the rank-and-file masses, it totally didn't matter. The collective belief in this divine sign completely erased their despair. They wept with joy. The talk of surrender evaporated literally overnight, and it was replaced by an iron resolve to fight. That incredible shift leads us into Section 4, the desperate counterattack. That newfound resolve brings us to the second stage of the lance's impact. They decided that instead of starving to death behind the walls, they were going to march right out and face Kerbogha in open combat. They placed their military fate in the hands of Bohemond of Taranto. Knowing he had an exhausted, mostly infantry-based force with almost no horses, he enforced strict discipline. He divided the army into 6 main battalions, put dismounted, heavily armored knights in the front lines to absorb the initial shock, and ordered them to advance in a tight echelon formation over the bridge out of the city. But here's the craziest part. These military tactics were fueled entirely by their restored morale. Driven by their newfound religious fervor, the Crusaders actually engaged in 3 days of fasting and prayer before marching out. Keep in mind, they were already starving to death.
Yet they chose to fast further as a spiritual cleanse, processing with the lance and fully unifying their deeply fractured ranks into one single highly motivated weapon.
And that sets the stage for Section 5, Victory on the Battlefield, Defeating the Impossible.
This brings us to the third and final stage. On the morning of June 28th, they marched out to face a stark numerical disadvantage. You've got about 20,000 malnourished crusaders, functioning practically without cavalry, advancing against a Muslim coalition that was anywhere from roughly double to quadruple their size. By all conventional military logic of the era, the crusaders absolutely should have been slaughtered.
So, the crucial point is that when the two forces met, Carboga hesitated. He wanted to wait until the whole Crusader army was out of the gates so he could crush them all at once. But that fatal delay allowed the Crusaders to form their unbreakable lines. As they advanced, singing hymns, the sheer, terrifying discipline of their charge completely shocked the Muslim army. Furthermore, Carboga's coalition was deeply fragmented. Many of his emirs resented him, and, fearing his growing power, they actually panicked at the sight of this unyielding Frankish advance and began to desert the field.
What should have been a massacre turned into a stunning rout. The Muslim army's lines broke entirely. The Crusaders not only shattered the siege, but they swept directly into the abandoned enemy camps. They found massive quantities of cooked meat, grain, horses, and treasure. In a single afternoon, the crushing famine was ended, and the First Crusade was saved.
Let's look at the aftermath in Section 6, the legacy of the lance, miracle or fraud.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because the aftermath of this relic is just as fascinating and highly controversial. On one side, you have the Provençal masses and chroniclers who firmly maintain this was literal divine intervention. On the other side, many of the skeptical Crusader leaders at the time, alongside modern historical consensus, view the event as a pious fraud, basically a manufactured psychological tool, perhaps planted by Peter or his backers, to manipulate a desperate army into taking action. And those doubts over the relic's authenticity, they didn't just go away. In fact, they grew so loud that the following year, in April 1099, Peter Bartholomew voluntarily demanded a trial by fire to prove his visions were real. He walked down a path constructed between two massive walls of flame. Tragically, he was horribly burned and died in sheer agony 12 days later, which cast a massive shadow over the physical authenticity of the object he found.
But, perhaps obsessing over the origin of the relic misses the point entirely. The lance's true power lay in the human mind, not in the metal itself. Regardless of whether it was genuine or a complete, brilliant forgery, the collective belief in the lance acted as the ultimate psychological catalyst. It shifted the Crusaders' mindset overnight, turning them from starving, divided victims into a unified, fearless force of victors.
So I'll leave you with this. Does the objective truth of a relic really matter if the collective belief in it has the power to entirely alter the course of history? It's a profound testament to the raw, undeniable power of human belief in the face of absolutely impossible odds. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the history that shapes our world.